Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Unifying Force. I'm your host, Catherine, and joined.
Good morning, all. I hope that I am not frozen. I see some of the others maybe. But how are we doing this morning?
Great, you too?
Doing well, doing well.
All right, so today I thought we would talk about cults in Star Wars. There are so many of them, and they are so cool. For example, the Sith. Of course, they're not. Of course, they did definitely qualify as a cult as opposed to the Jedi, or much more of a religion. What I find really interesting about the Sith is that, given that they're much more forward-thinking in terms of, or inner-thinking towards themselves, it's a very cult-like atmosphere. They may not particularly follow a singular individual's code, but they are very self-appointed in the way that they will not open themselves to any forms of interpretation. They're always going to be doing exactly what they want. They believe it's their birthright to have totalitarian rule over the galaxy. They despise the Jedi with a passion, and they embrace the dark side because they feel that their passion is their strength. Seems like something that you get out of a lot of other real-world cults as well. People say, "Oh, join your inner," it's kind of really a darker kind of place to go. We've seen other cults like that in Star Wars before. The Yuzong Vong, the bloodthirsty alien cult. You've seen the Death Watch. You've seen the Watch. And I just find these things like really fascinating that they're introducing this to Star Wars, given that they have a lot of real world parallels. What's your favorite Star Wars cult, David?
I mean, it depends on your definition of cult. And I think probably my favorite Star Wars cult would be a subset of the Jedi religion. It would be possibly the Guardians of the Whills. Right? Is if you consider that a cult, it's a subset. It has its own kind of separate beliefs. You know, they're not necessarily Jedi, but they believe in the Force, and you know they've got their own kind of deal going. Would you consider that a cult? Is it?
I would suppose kind of, but I would imagine that given the two representatives of them that we've seen, Baze and Sheerut, they seem like they would be very much more open with other people. I mean, yes, they are a bit cult-like, I suppose, because they do utter their mantras. They're very dedicated to their cause, but they're also very open and welcoming and understanding with other people. It's like it's not like when they meet somebody that they're immediately trying to badger them and indoctrinate them into the into their denomination, so to speak.
Right.
But I get how that could be another introvert offshoot of that for sure.
I think it's more of like a benevolent cult as opposed to the negative connotation of the cult part, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess that word sometimes does carry negative connotations, with the exception of the people who are actually in the cult. Kind of like the Sith, of course, they don't consider themselves bad. As George Lucas says, no villain does consider themselves bad. They always think they're doing good. Possibly with the exception of Palpatine because of his whole unlimited power.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're going to have unlimited power, you might as well have some friends to share it with.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that there's a number of really cool representations of cults in there. And like I said, is they don't have to be the negative ones. And you see the expanse of how the cult of Sith is, how expansive and how huge and how many members there apparently are in those crowd scenes in Rise of Skywalker. so, but just tons and tons of them. So if that's being the cult and the smaller number of it, what do you think, or what do you think? I don't know that it's ever been directly said. What do you think is the major religion of the galaxy? What is the biggest thing out there? Is it the Force? Is it Jediism?
I suppose it could be.
So, like I said, I hope it's not just me that keeps freezing as I see things going in and out. But I mean, I think there's arguments back and forth on what the major religion of the galaxy could be. What do any of you out there listening think? What do you think the major religion of the galaxy could be?
I think that as far as religions go, the Jedi would qualify as a religion. They do follow a doctrine, but they are very open with their beliefs. They are always wanting to go out and help people. They want to try and make the galaxy a better place, and they will always be open to new information. Like Yoda will always tell you, always in motion is the future.
Yeah, and I mean,
be open to what's going on, listen to his surroundings, type of thing. He's going to help people who have their problems. He's not going to try and immediately sway you to his way. I mean, sure, a little bit in the prequels, he might try and guide people like Anakin with a particular subset direction they should be going. But I think that's much more qualified as a religion, because it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. As I would think it would qualify as religion. And if you hit like dictionary.com's definition of a cult, since we're, kind of treading around on that, is they're talking about a relatively small group of people having the religious beliefs. And it does say that they're considered by others being possibly strange or sinister. And definitely the qualifications of the Sith right there. But the Jedi are not really a relatively small group, at least from the impression that we get. I mean, giant, humongous temple on Coruscant, the largest city there. So I mean, that right there rules out relatively small. But as far as in the remainder of the galaxy, I just don't know. The other than Jeddah, which I think is a scene for the Sith and the Jedi, that the Jedi temple we've seen in Rebels are like kind of little hidden things that pop up out of the ground, or is like hidden within mountains and things that I don't know that everyone knows about in all those locations.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I feel also it's true that certain times you have different denominations within it, but I think the primary separator is that a religion is more, I think, open to other people. Cults are a lot more enclosed. They have a very specific thing they want you to do. You can't really stray from the path. They'll give you a little bit of leeway. Like the Jedi gave Anakin a lot of leeway before they really started, cracking down on it. But look at something like the Watch from The Mandalorian, right? And you have to keep your helmets on the whole time. You got
Yeah, as you're for sure is the rules and everything is very specific. We've been very fortunate to see, even in as short a period as we've had in The Mandalorian, is we've seen several different factions within the Mandalore, and then increasingly we've seen that in Rebels as well. Is there all the different factions that have that different belief, and that is spread throughout more than just a place, because as they say repeatedly, it's a creed. Is there are people involved from all different species and planets in being Mandalorians. So we are
Yep.
talking about cults in Star Wars as people are coming in today. So join in and ask questions, please. What do you think are some cults in Star Wars? What do you think about the Star Warsy religions? What's out there? Question has been asked before if you haven't gotten around to it. What do you think the major religion of the galaxy is? Is it in fact Jediism or the Force? Don't know. So I don't think we've been handed this straight out. And always, 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 if you have any questions as we're talking along, please share. I'm gonna put a plug for I think something that has become a major religion in Star Wars, at least kind of in some non-canon stuff, would be the Wookiee religion. So I have the great tree behind me here, is from a number of currently non-canon sources. Is Life Day is widely celebrated by Wookiees and humans alike. I mean, we got the greatness, the joy, the whatever you consider it, of the holiday special coming out of that. And they've said that Luke, Leia, Han, they visited Kashyyyk more than once for Life Day. And I think some non-canon resources have said that Life Day trees, decorated trees, appear, well, holographic versions of Life Day trees, because not actual trees, appear on Coruscant. So that religion spreading throughout the galaxy, and its connotations and ties to is essentially some levels of Christian Christmas. So that could be some of the things as well. But is it, what other cults can we think out there? What's the festival in Rise of Skywalker? Well, the festival that Rey, that Finn, that they all kind of cruise through as they're coming through and looking for the Sith runes. Is, I know the people are the Aki possibly, but not overly sure what that festival is called. That's other religions from planets coming through. I know you're out there, people. I want to see some questions. Oh, let's see. Come on. All right. No questions on that. So let's talk about the cult of the Sith then. Is we see that hugely. It's been all along. He says, there's only two, supposedly the rule of twos in the Sith, but then you see this giant stadium of people constantly talking in the background. So how does that work? How does the rule of twos go? How does that figure in to the massive cult that we have that's displayed, that they're all out there?
I'm back.
Excellent. The question that I had just asked of those watching was, so we have this giant cult of the Sith in Rise of Skywalker. How does the rule of two, that there's only two, a master and an apprentice, how does that figure into the fact that we have all of these others in the background there?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile that. I don't think we've seen anything in canon that does. I don't know of anything outside of canon that kind of reconciles that, unless the rule of two applies to just Force practitioners, possibly, and the rest of the cult are servicing them.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, the way I interpret it is that the rule of two was specifically something that was going to require a lot of patience, because Darth Bane, when he created it, obviously knew it wasn't going to happen like overnight, and that was something in service to them. Whereas the Sith cult on Exegol, like all that's what you're talking about, like all those Sith worshippers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so they were an offshoot of. So when the Sith fell 1,000 years before the prequel trilogy, they were the worshippers who were originally there on Moorband, and they took off on their own to Exegol, which even at that time was a long abandoned Sith bastion. And the rule of two kind of went off and did its own thing, and they didn't really know about it until later. And they found out about it, and they're kind of monitoring their progress. And around the time of the prequels, a little bit before then, they sent their wayfinders off in these 2 stone chests as a gift to Palpatine, essentially, for achieving, the grand goal of taking over the galaxy. And that's when he first found out about them. But that's also a very, to me, because when you look at what a Sith basically is, since Force sensitivity can technically exist anywhere in the galaxy, then basically, if you're born into that cult and you're Force sensitive, then it doesn't matter how skilled you are, you technically qualify as a Sith. But that's definitely a cult, because they are very, the fact that they exist all on their own on this one little planet, they don't really interact with Palpatine or anything, but they worship him to no end. Like, that's very, and they want to do anything, like, they don't care that they raised this army and raised all this military machines all by themselves, but they don't seem to care about elevating themselves as opposed to elevating Palpatine. It's all about him. And that's like another, like, oh, we always have to follow this doctrine strict to a T, kind of like in The Watch, where everybody's got to wear their masks, they got to hide themselves, they have to follow this strict code, and they're very aggressive. And again, you see part of the storyline of the Mandalorian is Din Djarin kind of breaking free from that. But and I think that's kind of one of the differences. Like, cults are a lot more strict than other denominations or kind of religions. Take, for instance, the other real world cults we've seen, and how that kind of plays back into it. So I think that's really fascinating how they plug that stuff back into Star Wars, like the Emperor system in Japan. How you had the, in the war, they couldn't even fathom the idea of surrendering. Oh, it's never going to happen. You couldn't believe it. You had certain Japanese troops on certain islands weren't surrendering until years after the war was over, not because they didn't know it was over, but they couldn't, because when the Americans would put up flyers announcing that, hey guys, the war's over, blah, 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 they couldn't believe it because they couldn't fathom the notion that Japan would surrender. It's like they believed in the war was over, but it's like this totally, when you're locked in, you're locked in. Like I was reading a book the other day even about it, where when the Japanese ships were sinking off Guadalcanal, they were prioritizing saving the portrait of the emperor as opposed to the admirals and the colonels. And I'm like, that's a very strong let it in belief system type of thing. And so I like that they kind of, you see that in certain types of cults, like the Death Watch, for instance. I remember they made such a strong impression on me when they first came in, because Obi-Wan went to the moon outside of Mandalore. He's kind of doing his investigation, and just because one Mandalorian failed to kill him, Pre Vizsla walks up and just says failure, and he just shoots him. It's like severely strict, and they just want to go back to this old the old ways. And so I find that that's a very it's sort of an almost abnormal type of psyche type of thing, whereas the Jedi, even though the Jedi may make mistakes, but they mean well, and they're very opening to lots of other people.
Right. And again, it's the from a certain point of view is, some people are going to call the Watch a cult. Nobody in the Watch is going to do that, and some people are going to call the Jedi that as well. While you were down off a little bit, as I was asking a question about the Aki Aki, who we see in Rise of Skywalker, is the festival of the ancestors. It was answered in the chat there about that being religion versus cult is it's a smaller number of people, but it doesn't have that. I don't think people, especially the characters that we've seen interact, don't have that sinister connotation to it.
Yeah, I kind of viewed that as more of a kind of like a throwback to the old pagan religions and stuff. You can imagine that a lot of planets in the Star Wars galaxy are probably very primitive and cut off from the rest of everything, kind of like the Aki Aki, and they worship whatever their god is. And or like C-3PO seems to know a lot about it, and I'd like to hear more about it.
Yeah.
And so they have this their festival is like very fun. And remember how when Poe, Finn, and Rey show up there, they're very welcoming. And they they give them their their necklaces, and they invite them to have food and invite them to dance and that's like a really, I didn't really perceive that so much as a cult. That's more like a a practicing thing going on. That's more like that's very much a part of their, you see, that's kind of more a part of their daily lives. It's a bit more of their, it's their own culture, so to speak. It's not like they're immediately slamming on your door with the book saying, come with me, come with me if you want to live, or the apocalypse is coming. You don't have any of that going on there.
So
But
do we know of a group, any group in the galaxy that is like popping from star system to star system, from planet to planet, that's proselytizing their religion, that's going around?
I don't think so. I mean, other than the Jedi potentially, because
Yeah.
they're going, when they identify the younglings, they'll go to planets and they'll, uh, try and get them to get, part with their kids or whatever. But I wouldn't imagine that. I would think that would be a really fascinating story to tell as well, because I don't think the Jedi would ever pressure a family to do that. But yeah, because that's sort of like how you remember in the Tibetan monasteries that the people who are like born and raised up there, it's like an honor if they pick you to be raised within the monastery from a child, and that's like their whole culture, right? Their whole culture kind of exists to serve that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen arguments online. I was doing a little bit of reading on this ahead of time, and you know, maybe it's a Sith operative, maybe it's
They want
not.
to show this view of the world.
Yeah, well, there's people online that are arguing. It's like, well, how is the Jedi not? Is they're showing up, they're taking your kids? Is like, I
Yeah,
don't think they are, but they are wearing like the legendary most powerful weapon in the galaxy on their hip when they're asking for your kid. So, I mean, it's all that from a certain point of view, and don't get me wrong, I'm not like necessarily advocating that the Jedi are this evil, sinister cult, but I like to play the devil's advocate. That's kind of my job.
yeah, uh, yeah. But like cult wise, another one I would say would be like Uzon Vong. Like they're kind of being replaced now in the new canon by the Grisk, and they're like their own whole different kind of, like the Uzong Vong were much more, revolving around sacrifice and bloodthirsty, and it was like they're serving their higher power, their whole god of Zenoma Seacot and all of that kind of thing, and it was just something that you couldn't really reason with or rationalize with, and they were all just totally for the cause, and like that was so I find that cults kind of carry something a bit more sinister to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess regarding what people in the chat are saying about the Jedi, yes, it's true that they're kind of taking their kids, but I don't think it's them going on the door and saying, sorry, you have to give up your child or anything like that. I think it's more that they invite them and say, hey, it's kind of their status of their, the fact that the Jedi are clearly the focus of hero worship in the galaxy, that the parents probably feel really honored that their kid is being chosen for this. But I don't think that if the parent was reluctant, that the Jedi would actually, kidnap them or anything like that.
No, I agree with you 100%. I don't think it would. Just I think there is the possibility of that being seen as somewhat of a pressure, as somebody walking in with a lightsaber on their hip going, I don't necessarily know that they would. So mention in the chat about the Black Sun or the Skywalkers in the extended universe. The Ewoks worshiping C-3PO, the cult of C-3PO right there is, I think that's absolutely perfect.
Yes, I saw some good questions going off in the chat asking what do we think of the Black Sun or the Skywalkers in the expanded universe and how the Ewoks worship C-3PO. What are your thoughts?
The worship of C-3PO is, I think I would love to know more about, and there may be some more stuff because there is a number of non-canon things about the Ewoks. I think is where did that originally come from? What was in their value system beforehand? Was there this giant golden god that they thought he was, or are they just seeing him come in to himself and go, oh, it's this giant gold thing, is I'm worshiping C-3PO himself? Does he represent something else in their belief system, or is it just like, wow, this guy?
That's true, because on the one hand, they recognize him as their god, which begs the question, where did they see that before? And some idea just popped into my mind from the Well of the Souls from Raiders of the Lost Ark that had the R2 and
Mhm.
C3PO
Yep.
hieroglyphs. Like, hey, maybe there's something there. Maybe there is a god traveling the universe. Because remember, the Staff of Ra showed up in Clone Wars. So maybe there is somebody who looks like C3PO that's a god that's traveling the galaxy.
And it's not like he's the only protocol call droid of that model. Maybe there's
Yeah.
another one that's been programmed in some other way that he is traveling from planet to planet, presenting himself as a god.
Mhm. Yeah, and then, the Skywalkers in the EU is another interesting one brought up, and that's true because the Skywalker name kind of takes on a whole other meaning in the expanded universe versus uh, what it is in the canon. And yes, when the Skywalkers, you have the ones that turn, to the dark side. They kind of have. That's true that they some of them kind of have their own cult of personality, kind of their own self, so to speak. And I'd say that would qualify. Uh,
And the legends that come around it that you do see in canon is, where, Ray and Finn are questioning and almost in disbelief when, Han mentions Luke and he has to go. It's true. It's all true. The Force, the Jedi, all of it.
yeah, for sure. Uh, and then the Black Sun, that was another one because that's was really heavy in the expanded universe, and they've been bringing it back into canon for a bit. But yeah, that one's kind of
So
that's
tell
kind
me
of
more
more.
about it, because I don't know anything, I don't think, about the Black Sun.
So okay, just a second here. So the Black Sun was a criminal organization that did have a sub-denomination of its own belief systems, and Palpatine deemed it a threat to his power. And in the expanded universe, he had tasked Maul with eradicating it, type of thing.
Mm.
But then he sort of becomes sort of an affiliate. It's been a while since I've read those stories, but I'd say that kind of goes down that same line of qualifications as well. It's just I find that when it comes to the difference between culture versus cult is that cult tends to be a very self-centered thing where there's usually a charlatan involved somewhere. Like there's a guy who's getting something out of it for themselves. Think of a Jim Jones or a Vernon Howell type guys. They're doing it because they want the power. Like the whole thing with everybody remembers the whole Waco thing. Of course he's stockpiling illegal weapons because he wants to fulfill it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, everybody's going to come and get us. And it's like, well, they didn't care about that until you told the mailman that you were stockpiling all this stuff. And it's like, because he wants that feeling of power, because then people see, oh, he was right. And that's kind of a very self-fulfilling thing. Same with Jim Jones,
Yeah,
at the
it's
whole
the very
Jonestown
place
thing.
where the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" comes from.
Yeah, and it's like there are a few people at that Jonestown thing which were smart enough to call him out, saying what possible miscommunication could lead to the incident on the runway. And know he had those people killed first, but it's in service to themselves. They're ingratiating themselves and they love the power so much. It's like, sure, Jones could have taken the money and run if he wanted to, but that's not why he did it. He did it for the power. And it's very much that's a much more so cult is a much more self-serving type of thing where you're getting something out of it for yourself at the expense of other people. And you may construct a very delicate belief system, a very intricate one, to get the other people to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but it's not something that you yourself as the head of the cult necessarily believes in. Like when
So,
Palpatine gives his grand speech in Revenge of the Sith where he says that, oh, we're going to create this new empire for a safe and secure society. It's like, or when he tells Anakin the best part, like when he says, once more, the Sith will rule the galaxy. Oh, and we'll have peace. It's like, yeah, no.
so let me ask you this relating to that speech. Is the Sith a religious cult, or is the cult of Palpatine a political cult? Is, cult of Hitler?
That's,
Is it Nazism? Is it?
yeah, I think for Palpatine specifically, it's more of a political cult because in the films, you don't really hear much from Palpatine and what his own thoughts about the Sith are, or about that whole religion, or rather of their whole belief system. The only time you get really close to that is in Episode 3 when he tells Anakin that, Anakin, if you want to understand the great mystery, you have to embrace a larger view of the Force, not just a simple dogmatic view of the Jedi. And
It's not a
ironically,
story the Jedi would tell you.
right, and it's ironic because he's right about that, but it's ironic because he's a Sith, so of course he's not going to have an unbiased opinion either. It's going to be very strongly biased. But yes, he's very much more of a political cult. He's all about harnessing the power. Like when he says unlimited power, and he just, he wants to, because that's something I wish the movies went into more. Like, what does, like, if Palpatine's sitting on the top of the mountain and has everything he's wanted, what is it that he's really interested in? In Rebels, they went into it a little bit where he's trying to control the world between worlds, but it's like, is he doing that just for the sake of having a power trip and simplifying future military victories, or is he doing that because he has some type of true religious belief of something that he's actually trying to achieve? And they don't really dive into that. So I think it's much more of a cult of kind of like a Hitler political type of cult thing for Palpatine specifically.
Because the first thing he does after, the attempt on my life, after Windu has come in and he's defeated Windu and he's turned to Anakin, what's the first thing he does is go give a big speech to the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about that. Yeah. And again, and with that, we found out also in the canon novels that unlike an actual empire where the Senate does serve a very vital function, in the Star Wars universe, the Senate didn't serve any purpose after Revenge of the Sith. He just had it there to give them the illusion of power, and it wasn't until the original film, the timeline of the original film came along when he dissolved the Senate to replace it with the Death Star, that it suddenly occurred to all the Imperial senators that, oh, we haven't really been in charge this whole time. Right. And you see other real world parallels. Once the senators found out that in Rome under Julius Caesar, well, that was the end of Caesar. Or you see that again with guys like Robespierre leading the terror in France. Once he decided to turn on the fellow people in the council who were leading this whole terror, they didn't like him anymore. So Palpatine, I think in a way he's thinking ahead, because he doesn't want his underlings to be able to betray him if they find out that they don't actually have as much power as they think they do. But yeah, so in that respect, I think it's much more of a political cult for Palpatine as opposed to a religious type of cult. I would be interested if he did have any such beliefs, but I haven't really gone into that as much.
Right. I have not read some of those where something like might appear of that is Palpatine's religious beliefs. But then again, I tend to read mostly the EU comics, not necessarily all the novels, and I think that's maybe that's where we might see something like that happening.
Yeah, but another one that also regarding the Death Watch, what I liked is that they kind of represented the old EU version of the Mandalorians. Like they're the warrior cult, which would go from planet to planet like locusts and just take everything they wanted and convert and annex everything. Whereas you see this very pacifist society in the new canon, and you could tell that something drastic must have happened there, because the fact that Duchess Satine was so adamant that we can't get involved in war, we must preserve these ways, tells you that there is, as the old saying goes, there is some truth in legends. Like some part of that Death Watch cult used to have been a more mainstream thing for Mandalore at large. And so the fact that they're very much stringent to that type of race, similar to how I was talking earlier about Japan. There's still ultra-nationalist movement over there want to go back to the Emperor system, much like you have Pre-Vizsla wanting to go back to the old Death Watch, the warrior Mandalore type system. That's, again, with Mandalore, you can tell it's a firm belief in a particular structure, and if you don't mold to that structure to a T or even a failure, you're shot,
which is something we may see coming in The Mandalorian Season 3, is because the wielder of the Darksaber right now is one of these very rigid, well, before he met, Grogu, very rigid, mask-only kind of zealot. Is that a wrong word? I don't know. But potentially being entitled to rule all of Mandalore.
That's true. He is they do call him a zealot, and he does fit that because he's very much dedicated to it. We're seeing it starting to erode with him a little bit, and that is setting up an interesting storyline, because Bo-Katan, on the other hand, you could tell she would just want to take the sword. She wants the best for the people, even though her background is a little bit checkered, and we're not sure exactly that may be the best thing, but because she respects the whole mythology of this saber, she's not just going to take it from him, which is why Moff Gideon was kind of laughing at her that, haha, she can't take the sword, just has to take it from you in combat. But that's also a very zealot type thing, that even though it was kind of ironic, because when Bo-Katan first met Din Djarin, she and her friends were like, oh, he's one of them, like there's a sense of otherness, and they criticized him for it. But then she herself is demonstrating she's a bit of a zealot, because she won't just simply she could just take the dark saber and say, okay, we'll just keep it a secret. We'll just make up a story about how I'm the one who actually got it instead of you.
And I
But she
wonder
doesn't
if
do that
some
because
of
she's
that is
still like,
because
even in her brain, she's still dedicated to that belief system, and she wants to do it like honorably.
I wonder if some of that's that she's been burned by that before. Will we see a backstory where she was not given full rights as the ruler of Mandalore because the previous time that she got the dark saber, it was because Sabine had given it to her? Has she been burned by not following that rule before?
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see. And then another potential offshoot of that, I wonder, if, with the Book of Boba Fett, what he's exactly, because there's all sorts of implications of him sitting on Jabba's throne. But as we know, they clarified in The Mandalorian that yes, he is indeed a Mandalorian, contrary to what what's his name said in the Clone Wars. And so it's interesting if he's going to carry any of his own, because we don't really know much about Boba Fett's own personal beliefs. We know that he's, a very loyal bounty hunter, uh, but it would be interesting to see if he's going to carry into that and that type of mantra going forward. Because the thing with also, as far as an average Mandalorian and how it's what, yes, they say things like this is the way, but the average Mandalorian doesn't seem like too much like a zealot. It's not too much. It's not too much negative. It's like they'll adopt, like, again, they'll like the whole basis of adopting foundlings and how they're genuinely looking out for other people. And if you, and it does have a little bit of a cult-like aspect to it. Like they'll excommunicate you if you break the code, or oh, has anyone ever seen you without your mask? Oh, this is the way. And but they're not exactly, they're just at this point in their history, in the post Return of the Jedi Mandalorian timeline, they're seeming to focus primarily on survival right now. But it's interesting to see that once they get back to power, what will their goals be? Will they be going back to the pacifist ways of Duchess Satine? I have a hard time buying that, especially after as much as Mandalore suffered. Or will they go back to the old Death Watch thing? It's like, oh, we need to adopt our, stringent power again. And it's going to be really interesting. And it's kind of straddling that line because you have some zealots, you have the darker, the Watch and the Death Watch type cult. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see how they blend this stuff together going forward.
And you've got the potential for them to even do what we were talking about and try and spread this throughout the galaxy, because Mandalore is essentially ruined. There's not a whole lot of spreading that you can do to rebuild the empire outside of like a few domed cities kind of protected. The planet is done.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing that story told too, because in the old EU, Mandalore wasn't that desolate. It wasn't domed cities. And that, but now we're seeing that it's the aftermath of some type of catastrophe, that they've been just trying to live in these domes. And granted, they did raise the possibility that the notion of Mandalore being ruined might be Imperial propaganda to scare other Mandalorians away and dissuade them from coming together. But I think that is kind of that whole Mandalore thing is the very strong backbone of a current cult. It kind of teetering on the edge. It's like it's a cult. It still has a strict belief system. We're going to see where it goes. Whereas another version of that would be, as far as religions, the post Return of the Jedi version of the Jedi. So Luke spent decades traveling the galaxy and learning what the Force means to other people. And he goes to places like where he goes to the one planet and they call it the Tide. And it's something that they don't fully embrace and they kind of look down on it in certain ways. He goes to other planets and they treat it as some, like even the robots on the storyline where he goes to, I can't remember. It's like he's going to rescue, I think it was a C-3PO R2-D2 from the robot things, and they're aware of the Force. And it's just like you're seeing all these different types of interpretations. And it's really interesting that I would love to hear what Luke's Jedi Academy was like, because is he trying to redefine it based on all this new information that he's been gathering from all these other cultures? Like redefine the Jedi, so to speak?
So I kind of hear you saying is that what was religion is becoming a cult. What was a cult is becoming a religion in the Star Wars, just based on who is in power in the galaxy, because that what is sinister is an interpretation of the people. And if the
It's
Jedi,
true.
though being trying to help, but when there's only a few of them, Luke, Rey, Ahsoka, who's been hanging out, they're the ones. But by associating with them, because you're under Imperial rule, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to have a harder time. So it's kind of it's a different level. It's the
That's
Jedi.
true. Well, it's like as we recently saw in Bad Batch, when once Order 66 happens, Crosshair is totally understanding of it. He doesn't mind it. Whereas the other guy, Echo, he's like, there's nothing about this even makes sense, And like nobody is questioning the logic. And why would the Jedi, after 3 years of fighting for the Republic, just randomly turn on the Chancellor and try and assassinate him? And how does this spread to a wide conspiracy? Like, if people are so drunk on their own Kool-Aid, and specifically the Chancellor's Kool-Aid, that they're not really questioning it. And how, yes, he is demonized. The Chancellor totally demonizes the Jedi and tries to make them out to be some evil cult. Yeah, because it is depending on who's in charge and what their own preferences are, how things are going to be viewed by the rest of the people, which is goes back to Palpatine favoring the whole political cult, whereas the Jedi are just they were much more about a religion. And granted, they did become something different in the prequels. They were more of a political institution themselves, whereas in the original trilogy and beyond, the Jedi are Yoda and Obi-Wan are just teaching Luke the basic tenets of the Force, trying to get back in touch with oneself and nature, kind of like Qui-Gon. He was the only one of the Jedi who could see that Anakin was the chosen one, because he's not as interested in the whole institutionalization of these ideas and forming a whole business out of it, so to speak. And so I will be it's fascinating to see how that's going to come back in a way, because eventually they're going to get to the post Episode 9 version of what the Jedi are going to be. And I think with Rey being in possession of the books, and she doesn't have any biases against the Jedi or for them, that it's going to be in safe hands, I would assume. But I think that is a good point you brought up, though, how things, cults become religions and religions become cults. Like Mandalore going from the whole Death Watch warrior cult to being the pacifist people, and now being somewhere in the middle.
And Ben's cool. Just like, weapons are part of my religion. That's not what Satine said.
That's right, because he's from that other offshoot. And then we see also in the real world that a lot of major religions today started out classified as cults because they were very small originally. And you had to be like hiding in the dark and not really showing people that you believed in these certain things, otherwise you get persecuted for it. And yet now we've seen how they've taken off and become mainstream. And that they're not, and even then, I wouldn't say that it was fair to classify some of those religions as cults, because they weren't, run at the time by a bunch of charlatans. They weren't trying to stick you to this strict doctrine, so to speak. I mean, yes, there might be certain charlatans in there, like the televangelists or whatever, trying to give me money and I will cure your cancer type thing.
Exactly.
But on the whole, it's not really, that's not really what it's about. So.
No. I keep going to the Obi-Wan quote. It's all about a certain point of view. It's a certain point of view. Now let me throw you a loop, a curve. I haven't told you about this one ahead of time. I came across this in a little bit of research for this. Is what do you think about the Jedi being a cult, becoming a cult in real life? Okay. Now the U.S. Census does not recognize Jedi as a religion, but other countries do. There are 175,000 members or people who on the census for the United Kingdom in England recognize themselves as Jedi. It is the 7th largest religion in the country. In the 2016 census in Australia, there was a huge campaign for people not to write themselves in as Jedi, because it makes Australia appear to be more religious than it allegedly actually is. So where do you think that's going?
This kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the first episode of Unifying Force, that the what's neat when fans say may the Force be with you is that you don't have to have the supernatural powers of a Jedi, because the whole Force goes back to those Eastern religious ideas, those Taoist and those Buddhist origins, that it's about wishing somebody inner peace, being open more to nature with your life. And so it is kind of an analogy or another parable for Buddhism and Taoism. It's kind of what the Force is in Star Wars. Like the Jedi, you can tell, are much more like Buddhist monks than they are like cults like the Sith or anything like that. So I think that's an interesting idea, that people want to identify as Jedi, even though they don't have like their own, they don't have a church, they don't have a particular day of the week that they meet, and they don't follow, they don't, recite the mantras every day, so to speak. But I think that it doesn't really, you don't really need that either, because, who says religion has to be structured? So I think
after Rogue One, a lot of people are reciting the mantras. I am one
And
with the
yeah, that's
Force.
true.
The
Yeah,
Force is with
yeah.
me. After Rogue
I'm
One.
one with the Force. The Force is with me.
Exactly.
And it is interesting also when you brought up the wills, because it's like, okay, so they're the guardians of the Kyber Crystal
Mhm.
Temple, but they're
But they're
also
not
called the
Jedi.
guardians of, right, they're not Jedi, but it says, well, they're the guardians of the wills. I'm like, wait a minute, is the wills now in the canon a new term for the Kyber crystals? Because we know.
Yeah, I don't know if the people at home are hearing you or if it's just me that's slowing down or you're breaking up. Is the wills, as some of you may know and some of you may not, is Lucas's original term for the Force, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Or like when Yoda went to the heart of the galaxy, and you know he
Mhm.
saw the Force priestesses, and it turned out to just be almost like a ghost. It was like it's not like there were 5 individual actual beings there. It was just something that manifested itself to show him something. And imagine if you took all the different primitive cultures in Star Wars, or primitive, you know, like the Aki-Aki, so to speak, and brought them there and showed them that, and how they would spin that off into a huge thing of its own. And you see how these things do take on lives of their own, which is really neat. So yeah, I think as far as the real world goes, yeah, a lot of people like practicing so-called Jediism, and you know, as we've seen a lot of people in our own group here, Star Wars is their religion, Star Wars is their life, and that's how they get through tough times and stuff like that. You know, they take a lot of great messages out of Star Wars.
Absolutely, 100% is it's going to be a thing. The article that I'm reading, and it's an article from a while ago, and it is a semi-serious news source. It's not. We got this covered, I promise. But it's talking about how eventually at this point they see it going that well that in the United Kingdom there may well be like a physical Jedi temple at some point inside of 10 years. Is that people are thirsting for, hungry for, looking for that sort of thing, and we kind of make a little fun in this group about, and it's not even making fun, but talk about our Star Wars family here. But it's Star Wars is some people's family. Star Wars is some people's religion,
Oh
and
yeah, I've been really impressed seeing a lot of fans' collections. Like, I had no idea that some people just have, you go into their house and the whole thing is Star Wars. I'm like, wow, I need to see these people in my life more often.
yeah,
Yeah, but so yeah, I think this has been great. So the way that Star Wars, I think that's another way it relates to a lot of people, is that they pull a lot of stuff from real world inspiration to put in there to see. It's like, let's see where this goes, type of thing. As
well,
far
and
as,
that's where it came from. Is it's kind of a full cycle. Is Lucas found the tenets of being a Jedi from, I think it's credited as Buddhism, Taoism, and Methodism, Christianity. It is throwing those things into a blender, wiggling around. Here you go. You got these Jedi people, and now we're taking these movies, these shows, these things that we've seen, and we're pulling that back out and making that into a real world religion.
yeah, that's really cool. It's like life becomes art, becomes life again.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I
absolutely.
think, yeah, so that's really, yeah, so I think that's kind of sums up the main difference. Like, the cult is something that's kind of run more by the charlatan for their own ends, and other people kind of get brainwashed into it and don't realize that they're kind of serving something other than what they think they're serving. Whereas religion is more about trying to help people. And I mean, yes, it is a system and control in certain governments over time. Like, certainly, you know, the Roman Empire benefited from having Vatican City. It's like, oh, we'll just say all this Inquisition stuff is about religion, when really it was about politics. And it's
Yeah,
like, uh, and so that you can see how that kind of flows. But I really would love to see them, transform more of these types of cults. I mean, I'm sure that even though the Sith are technically gone now after Episode 9, that's certainly not going to be the last of a dark side cult that we're going to see in Star Wars. Like, we're going to see more of them. Hell, for all we know, there could already be other dark side cults out there on primitive planets. We just don't know about it yet.
exactly. Is that there's talk in the EU always about the transformation of what's the name of Dooku's planet? Um,
Serena?
Yeah, where there's this major religion of like 7 different gods that they worship, but once they figure out that Dooku is actually the ruling family and he comes in and he takes over, that goes to,
Oh,
a Sith type religion.
that reminds me of something I forgot to bring up. The Dathomir witches. They're
Hmm.
practically their own cult themselves. Remember in the 6th season of Clone Wars, the disappeared episodes where Mace Windu and Jar Jar Binks go to this planet and they're trying to find the missing the queen or whatever, and they find that this tribe is kind of worshiping what turns out to be the Dathomir witches because the witches came there, and because they're so much more both technologically, spiritually, and mystically more advanced than them, they worship them as gods, and that's like an interesting thing. It's like a chariots of the gods type of thing where some alien comes to a planet and introduces to a primitive society ways to advance their civilization. Uh, and so, yeah, and that is another fascinating thing that the
That,
Dathomir people, I mean, I would assume that their powers are somehow sourced from the Force, even though it's not Jedi, it's not Sith, it's like something different. And that's like
mhm.
another sort of cult within itself, and they definitely act like it. Yeah, when you see the whole upbringing, the whole trilogy about the Maul and his brother Savage, and how it's a totally female dominated society, how the men are totally subservient to them, that they will be fine, oh, I'll kill my brother if I'm ordered to do it because that's what I have to do. Is what the witches are telling me. And so that's like a whole other, cult within and of itself. But it's also lorded over by somebody in Mother Talzin, who is herself very supernatural, on like a whole different plane that we haven't really seen before. Like even Palpatine doesn't have that power. When he dies in Return of the Jedi, he has to come back by being hooked up to all these machines in a very miserable way. Whereas Mother Talzin, multiple times she seemed to die and come back.
Just
So
come
she's
back
like
in
on a whole other
a
plane.
sort of natural, if you will, way as opposed to a technological way.
Yes, and that was a really neat. I really want to see more of that. Like I know because once they canceled Clone Wars, unfortunately, some of the storyline of the Dathomir story got broken up a little bit. But I would wish that they would dive into that more. Like I wonder if during Luke's travels after Return of the Jedi, if he did kind of investigate those types of
Well,
other
there's room
supernatural
that
type.
we could see something like that in an Ahsoka show. They could go into a number of things because we assume that some of that will be her travels in search of Ezra. You
Yeah,
know, we'll see some of that sort of things and see a little bit different pieces and parts of the galaxy that we haven't seen because there's so much stuff out there that we've seen this much of that we want to see more and know more.
yeah, kind of like you saw that in Rebels, the hieroglyph on the gateway to the world between worlds. It was the Father, the Son, and the Daughter, and I was wondering, who drew that thing? Like did the Jedi put this portal there? Because this doesn't seem to be a Jedi specific thing. This is like a whole Force space time continuum thing, and yet it had this very primitive looking hieroglyph on the wall, and it's like that story is spreading around too, and who knows what that religion or that culture is like, how
And we
they.
may well get that because you've seen in the last week or so people putting together the from those runes, the big circular rune from Rebels. Is that the exact same circular runes and those things from the logo for the Ahsoka show? Looks like it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because Mike actually tried to decipher it, and we were working together when they first posted that, and we were scrutinizing the hell out of it, but there were too many missing symbols to
Hmm.
construct sensible words out of it. But presumably it does say something. They're just trying to hide the message currently.
Yeah.
So that'll
And
be really cool to see.
hopefully one day we'll figure that out. And you made an interesting point as well. Things that you could talk about for days and hours and things going forward because we're running a little bit low on time. But the fact that you've got this galaxy, you have planets that don't have as much technology, and you have others that are coming in. It's kind of like that episode of Indiana Jones that shall not be named, and it's where the aliens with the technology are showing up and becoming the gods of a planet,
Yeah,
creating those cults.
yeah. And in a way, even on a real world level, you could make the same argument for when in our own history, when far more advanced civilizations would like when they sailed in the New World and the primitive people there saw this superior technology and stuff for the first time. Or like
Yeah.
when Commodore Perry first sailed to Japan in 1853 with his steamships and his navy, and they're like, whoa, and it's like so. It's it's like really bad. It's like another version of that in a way. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
not on the level that they become like worship them as gods or anything, but
oh, and then you take that and you move that forward and you go with the theories that other science fiction has made. It was right there on the tip of my tongue and it's gone. Is Stargate. The arguments
yeah.
on Stargate Atlantis, and the Norse gods are the Roswell Greys and the no, 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 no.
Well, yeah,
Move.
just like in the Stargate movie, the so-called Ra and his people were just a few. It was an alien, and the so-called Anubis guards serving him were just other people.
Yeah.
And yet he took advantage of this primitive society who didn't know any better. And so, that's another word. That's a way how you can use your superiority for bad things as well.
So we are the primitive society that George Lucas is taking advantage of. That's
Yeah,
right.
pretty much. He's trying. I think that's kind of like sort of like when Gene Roddenberry envisioned Starfleet as the best that man can be. It's like a group of highly diversified, highly intelligent, mature people who are going out into the galaxy to try and help solve other people's smaller problems. And I think that's almost how George envisioned the Jedi as well initially, that they were supposed to be the good, advanced, morally pugnant people that were going to really go helping people in the galaxy. And then he shows with the prequels how it had used to be different, because we see that again between the prequels and the original trilogy, the Jedi changed radically. So I think that it's never going to, none of these things are going to subscribe to just one definition.
No, it's going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to depend on who's writing it, who's moving on, and even just, I think, influenced by the times, the actual times, because you see, it wasn't a different writer. It was George, however many years apart, and how what has changed in his mind is how he's writing the Jedi differently.
Right.
So,
because like I had mentioned also,
art imitates life.
Yeah, kind of like in the prequels, Palpatine, Lucas has said, is like a parallel for the rise of Julius Caesar, and how you can make the argument that since the Jedi Temple is right down the street from the Senate, and obviously has a lot of influence in that republic, that it's kind of like an analogy for Vatican City in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Except it fell in a different, like the actual Vatican City, of course, didn't get destroyed and assassinated or anything, but it's almost like George writing an alternate version history of that, which is cool. So we got now about 2 minutes to go. What any final thoughts?
Like I said, is I kind of ended it up where I was a minute ago. Art imitates life, life imitates art. Which one came first? Which one's going first? You don't know, and it's going to keep changing. It's going to keep doing that, going forward, going backwards, sideways. It's the butterfly effect. You cannot change anything, make any sort of change without affecting everything else as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love that, how you could take something from the real world, reinterpret it this way, and then you respond to real world events to try and change it and make it different as well. And how, like this whole conversation we've been having, the difference between cults, cultures, and religions, and how you just have all of that in Star Wars. And so that's like, I think that's really cool. And I look forward especially to, yeah, and I especially look forward, like you mentioned, that we're going to get more of that in Mandalorian season 3 and possibly in the Book of Boba Fett. And it's like right on the cusp, and we're going to see where these ideas are going sooner rather than later, which is really awesome. So yeah, this has been a great episode. Thank you for co-hosting today. You were fantastic.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it greatly. Want to tell everybody out there, don't forget to go check out, there's some new beard related kind of merchandise out there in our TeePublic store. Don't forget that, as well as the Cookopedia shirt. If you want to know why we call her that, because she knows all of the things that I don't know, and I'm babbling, and she tells me the real thing.
Yeah, and here's the Unifying Force T-shirt is out now as well. You can also get the Jedi Archives T-shirt. Join us every Thursday nights at 6:30 Pacific for the watch-alongs and our virtual Cantina happy hour every Tuesdays at 4 Pacific.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us, and I believe we will be back in a few weeks' time.
Yep, hope to see you all there. May the Force be with you.
Yep. May the Force be with you all, always.